Hello and welcome to another episode of Inclusion by Design. I'm your host, Uma Chatterjee. Before I dive into the episode today, I have a small request. If you like the reflective, open ended conversations that we are having here on the podcast, please do follow us, share the link with friends and communities who think like this. Do remember that small actions from your side, it goes a really long way in shaping how this podcast series will play out. So now, to invite my guest. My guest today is Dr. Nandini Ghosh. She is an academic activist who works on gender, disability, and the intersectionality of labor, migration, violence, as well as the human rights. I will invite her and she will introduce herself a little more. But I cannot not say that how excited I am to be interviewing you, Dr. Ghosh. I have heard of you. I have read your research papers. I've read your books. It's almost like you've followed somebody's work so much, and then you finally happen sitting in front of you and talking about that. So it's a privilege to have you here. Welcome to Inclusion by Design.
Thank you so much for inviting me. As you were speaking, I am a faculty member at the Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata. It's a research institute that works on issues of development. We have academic programs as well as research projects. But that is one part of my identity. The other is the fact that I have been for the last nearly 30 years now working on rights of persons with disabilities and uh, different issues that concern them in their daily lives.
Great. Uh, I would like to unfold this the work that you do. But before we get on to this, I usually ask my guests. So this population, this community that you work with, or you work along with them, um, if there were a alienation scale, an alienation meter, as I call it, where in this alienation meter or scale from 0 to 10, where would you put the kind of alienation or disconnect or discrimination, prejudice that this population faces? If you had to give a number, what would that be and why?
Are they on the scale at all? As you are aware, disability is it's like different conditions put together. So some people are there on that scale. So if you consider people with locomotor disability, people with blindness, to some extent people with deafness, these are people who would be somewhere at 4, 5 in terms of on the alienation scale. But there are these other disabilities that are not even on the radar till now. And that is where I think the alienation is complete. It's zero. Or it's 10 in terms of the alienation because they are not even recognized as people who might be discriminated against.
Can you give me an example of this?
So, if I give you, and particularly, I would like to speak about people with autism. So, people on the spectrum disorder. Where are these people? Where are their voices? We have some of the parents speaking up, but you don't have these people speaking up for themselves. So, their alienation is probably 10 on that scale. You speak of the invisible disabilities that we talk about. So, these blood disorders, the multiple sclerosis, people with spinal injury. These are the people who are not on the radar yet. So, alienation is probably a lot more for these people than for, say, people who are more visible and vocal.
So true. Dr. Ghosh, you often use this phrase, disability inclusion. Can you unlayer this phrase for me a little bit more?
So, disability inclusion, see, inclusion probably is understood by different groups in different ways. When we talk about inclusion in terms of disability, we want that disabled people should be included in every aspect of life and living
Right.
that anybody else has the opportunity to. So it's not just education and employment, which are, things that usually are always talking about. Then are they in education? And the other thing that we are talking about is medical care, in which disabled people should have inclusion. But there is so much more. What about family life? What about the right to marriage? What about the right to have children? What about leisure? What about pleasure? So many things. So we are not even talking about those things in terms of inclusion. But here is the question: when we talk about disability inclusion, let us also remember inclusion itself is layered, but disability is also layered, because disability is like a umbrella term. It's a like an umbrella under which we have put so many groups of people with so many different conditions. So people from having blindness, deafness, people who can have mobility issues, to people who have problems in understanding, people who have problems in connecting socially, to people who have blood disorders and require when you talk about inclusion, the spectrum also increases, because the inclusion is different for every group of people.
So the diversity of disabilities
Exactly.
then has to
Be reflected in the diverse solutions for inclusion.
wow. This is like a double one. Yeah.
It-
If to really real intent to inclusion, then would it have to factor in this?
Yes, but it is not that it can't be done. Let me give you an example. Yes, sometimes every time we talk about disability inclusion, the first thing we hear is that there isn't enough money to do it. Okay, so the easiest example I can give you is, you make any, say, building, quote unquote, accessible.
Right.
Okay, so you put in a ramp, you put in a lift, etc. Does it benefit only disabled people? No. It benefits the elderly, the sick people, pregnant women, temporarily disabled people. So, it is not that you are always pointing out that it's only for small category of people that you have to make so much of changes. No. When you put in that solution, it benefits entire range of people. And the best example is, go to any shopping mall now. There's a ramp and there are steps. Just sit there for 10 minutes and watch what people are using. Most people prefer to use the ramp, because it's just because you are walking straight into the thing, not climbing stairs. So that is what I am saying, that you can do it in shopping malls. Why can't you do it elsewhere? That's inclusion by design.
Yes. The inclusion by design, by intent and commitment. So well said. Okay, I'm going to build on this, this positive streaks, the optimism that you are, displaying. So it would be great if you can share a personal or an organizational story where you have witnessed the transformative power of inclusion, something that really showed you that how one act of inclusion can actually transform life or lives.
Um, in my 30 years, I have witnessed many of those. They are not very large changes, but they are very small steps on the way to bringing in inclusion. So, like, there are these small community level groups that operate. These are called disabled people's organizations. So DPOs are there at the panchayat level. Then they federate at the block level. Like that, they go up to down south. You will see some of these DPOs have done wonderful work. One example I will give you: there is this DPO in, I think it's Andhra Pradesh, that went and asked the local administration that you are doing 100 days work and we want to be included in this 100 days work. So initially they were like, disabled people can't work. How can you do this kind of work? So they actually negotiated with them and they got in. People who could labored. So in the making of the roads, like for the blind people. Okay, so digging is not such a. If you mark it out for them, they can.
Okay.
Of course. In the rural areas, people do it. Deaf people can carry loads. They did it. And the people who were having a locomotor disability were the ones who were taking care of the children in the crash. They were the ones who were doing the accounts for the Manrega work. So, this is what I say is inclusion. This is where it can work, and I have seen it working in South India. So, a lot of the time, disabled people are dismissed as being incapable. But you have to look beyond to see what is the capability, and then how can I use it to include them. That is where I think the
Sometimes it's just like you said, it's such a small action.
very
It's just a shift in the way you think.
exactly.
This is lovely. I want to move to a little more about the disabled people themselves. If I had to ask you, what are the 2 or 3 most blatant myths, stereotypes, or prejudices against disability? I know there's a huge spectrum of disability, but I just, if you were to say that, these are the top 3 stereotypes or discriminatory attitudes towards the disabled, what would that be? What would those be? I wanted to ask you this upfront.
The first and foremost is the assumption of incapacity. And that is the biggest challenge. The moment you hear or you see that this person is disabled, we immediately assume incapacity, and incapacity in all different ways. So, this is something that I think is the biggest challenge. The second would be this, along with this assumption of incapacity, the fact that, the only way you can deal with them is through pity. And in India, this mindset is very much prevalent, immediately, you know, I'll give you example. I'm trying to get onto the bus. I can do it myself as long as the bus stands still. But there would be 3 people who want to pull me up. I don't want to be pulled up. They have their pity. It is their need to show pity and pull me up. I have not. I have just asked for the bus to stay still till I get into the bus. So these are the things. So this is the second thing. This pity that actually prevents people from looking beyond the disability. That is the second thing. And I think the third thing that uh, generally people, when they think of disability, they always think in terms of dependence. So if I suppose I will bring in a student with disability, I will have to provide so many kinds of support. If I employ someone with disability, I have to give so much of support. So this dependence, this assumption of dependence, that a person is going to be forever dependent and I have to go around providing a lot of things for them, is the third largest barrier I think that disabled people encounter in this way to inclusion.
Just when you were giving these examples of these statements, I have often heard people saying, there's a silent stigma towards disabled people. From the way you speak, this is not even silent or invisible. This is quite obvious, this kind of. And so, of course, this has this kind of stigma or discrimination, even if somebody is not wanting to do it intentionally, there it has an impact on the mental health of people living with disabilities. How do you think society, is there a space for people living with disabilities to talk about what this stigma does to them?
Yes and no. I mean, in terms of space, if you would say, I think some people have access to that space, but there are many others who do not have access. And this, I will qualify this. So, like, nowadays, at least in urban India, it is very politically correct to give opportunity to disabled people to work in, CSR units, etc., or even the IT sector. So, a lot of people a lot of disabled people, especially the blind and the locomotor disabled, are entering the IT sector. So if you go to Sector 5 in Kolkata, you will see disabled people employed there. So the company is actually saying that we've employed, we are so good, we've employed so many disabled people. And because we have employed them, we are we are inclusion, we are bringing in inclusion. Again, examples. The glass door that you have to push to get into one of those buildings is so heavy that individually a person with locomotor disability may not be able to maneuver it. So every time they have to ask for help, your dependence reinforced. There was a young boy, not who was a wheelchair user. He was accommodated, and his office was on the 9th floor, and the only accessible toilet was on the 3rd floor. So every time he had to use the toilet, he had to come down so many floors by lift, which is always engaged, and then go up again. And in the IT sector, they don't allow long breaks. So you can imagine what happens. Informal sector, one factory in Gurgaon gives 10 minutes break to its employees. The women's toilet, not accessible, is 15 minutes walk away. So for the disabled girl who is working there, having locomotor disability, gets a 10-minute break, has to go 15 minutes, use the toilet, come back another 15 minutes, or she gets marked absent in the next shift. This is what is problematic for me. If you are building inclusion, you build inclusion properly. So this is what I think is very, very important, that when you conceive of inclusion, you conceive of diversity, you conceive of diverse needs of people. And there are good examples of the way in which people have done it. I'm sorry to talk about the bad examples because that is the general atmosphere. The good ones are very rare and in between, so we hardly get to see those.
So, has nothing changed, Dr. Ghosh? I mean, I know what kind of contribution you have to the PWD Act, and when I hear you, I see lots of things, like ramps, and then you also give an example of this, the glass door. Even I have been to many of these offices, large offices. Never struck me that how heavy that it is true. All those revolving glass doors in these malls. Um, so, what about systemic accountability? I mean, has nothing changed in terms of laws, policies? I can understand when you are saying you're talking about social norms, practices. What about laws and policies?
Yeah, laws and policies have changed a lot, and I'm happy because of that. The first proper law on disability that we had was the 1995 law. It was a law that was brought in through a single seating of the parliament, and it was passed by people because they wanted to be very magnanimous to give disabled people a law. But what that law did, it was a very path-breaking law. I'm critiquing it as a activist. I do critique sometimes, but it was path-breaking because of various reasons. Number one is that it gave disabled people an identity.
Yeah.
It clearly brought out a category of persons with disability that did not exist before. There were blind people, there were deaf people,
It
but
just
now
integrated it into.
and it also gave us the language of discrimination, which was not there also. So true. So you learn that okay, this is discrimination, that is discrimination. Not being allowed to go to school is discrimination. So the idea of discrimination. So actually, legal activism has done wonders in this country. The laws have come in because of international pressure, national activism, etc. Because the 2016 law that came because of the United Nations Convention that came in 2008. So India, and this is the way in which things move. And again, I'm being critical. 2008, we got the convention. immediately we decided that we needed to change our law because it did not fit in with that frame at all. So the process of drafting a new law started in 2010.
Okay.
This law is really good because after it was drafted by people from the sector. Then after it was drafted, it went around across, the draft was taken to each state, local people were consulted, people from rural areas were consulted, their ideas were fed into, their requirements were
Different languages.
26 languages the law draft was translated into. So this happened. And 2012, we had a excellent law drafted. 2014, the government changed.
Right. Yeah.
2016, we got a law with many things thrown out.
So it was watered down.
It was watered down. Chapters like there was a specific chapter on women with disabilities, which had very detailed specifications for women with disabilities. But the entire chapter was removed and two points were fitted in somewhere else. So this is what, but still the law is something on which we can stand. We can demand our rights. We can call for inclusion. And this law is a very good law on paper.
Okay.
How we translate it into action is now what we have to do. Things are changing. Things have changed. I will not say that it's all, bad. There are things that have happened, but there's still a lot left to happen. And specifically, the question of access. The question of access is not just physical access. The question of access is about attitudinal access. And that is what is still missing in our country.
But then this law gives you the weapon. I mean, people can go to court, people can litigate against the state or a particular party if there is discrimination. So at least so what you're saying is the law has given that footing to be able to escalate the matter in court.
But how easy is that? That is where the problem is, because the law provided for special courts. And special courts at district level.
Right.
So that people could go to these district courts, go to the specific judge who was, for persons with disabilities, because then we would sensitize that one judge.
Right.
And he or she would know about how to deal with the issues of persons with disabilities. But that has still not happened. We are,
Special courts are still not.
no, not at all. And even the high courts are not very accessible. So, I mean, see, going to court is an option. But going to court for a common person is not the option. Number two, for a person who has been socialized into discrimination, who has grown up with discrimination, to even point out discrimination is very difficult.
So it goes unrecognized, you mean?
A lot of the time. Unrecognized, unacknowledged. Unacknowledged. Because, suppose, I mean, again, I give you examples from what I see around this country. Like today, there is this example of a Dalit professor in Delhi University who has been denied a promotion, despite him having won a lot of international awards. So this is happening to the Dalits in this country. For the disabled, they are not even counted in terms of promotion. So you make an entry level, quote unquote, token inclusion, but then you don't move up. And how frustrating is that? And every time they will give you some reason that, ranging from we don't have the infrastructure to accommodate you to, you are not performing as well as the others. So it could be anywhere. And the person would never think of questioning that.
Because it gets so internalized, the stigma is.
And also, if I speak up, I may get thrown out. At least I have something now.
So, one of the things that struck me, Dr. Ghosh, is that, the internalized shame, the internalized stigma is that also must be taking a lot of mind space. So, what I mean is, I work with victims of sexual violence and survivors of trafficking. And in my stigma studies, I do a series of stigma studies and well being studies with them. One of the things that is very core is the internalized shame, the internalized stigma that, I've done something or I am something, I am defiled and I am dirty and there's something about me that makes people behave like this with me. That doesn't justify violence against me, but there must be something that I have done or the way I am that this has happened to me. And when a person is so entrenched or so experiencing high levels of self stigma, internalized stigma, then what you were saying very beautifully, there is no voice, there is no recognition that this is violence against me, this is discrimination, or this is unfair, injustice. I have to raise my voice. It somehow becomes a part of living. Like, शायद ऐसा ही होता है. Maybe that's how it is to be. But this takes a huge toll on uh, the mental well-being and self-esteem of the person. For me, one of the things that I have been able to do is bring such people, such survivors together, small peer groups, to talk about not about what kinds of stigma, but what does it do to me internally. So I just wanted to know, these kinds of spaces, support groups. I don't even want to call them support groups. These are actually peers. These are friends or people who have similar experiences. How do we talk about this stigma or the shame or how I feel about myself? Are there community spaces like that?
Um, See, for disabled people, the problem is there's a lot of isolation because in your village, you might be the only person, or even in your locality, you would be the only person. If you're a wheelchair user and you are going out, people will look at you and you've been further stigmatized. So it is a life of isolation. But having said that, I realize that with time, I'm realizing that there are people who have built their own communities.
Okay.
Some of these communities are disability specific communities, but some of these communities are also friends that they have made in their own area. So there is somewhere a kind of self affirmation that comes by being part of these groups. So just to give you an example again, I mean, there used to be a collective of women with disabilities that used to work in South Pradeep Parganas. For a number of reasons, the program stopped. But those women themselves are kept in touch. They meet once a month. They have picnics in winter. They invite each other to their family gatherings. They share resources among themselves. So if someone needs to go to the hospital, the others will help her out. So this group of say 5 6 women are their own community, despite each of them living with their family, but this is their core group. But there are others in urban spaces specifically where you will not find disability specific groups. You will find people with disability who have developed their own peer group. Friends from school, college, or friends from work who are their support mechanisms. And this community does help them out in a lot of ways. So people do make meaning of their lives. It's not, the what I think that the disabled people learn are the best people. They will say that we live with our disability. We don't live in spite of our disabilities. So that is one thing. But living with your disability also gives you the resources to have that social community around you, because otherwise the existence is meaningless. And every person, even a person with disability, wants to make some meaning out of their life.
Absolutely. And how do you see, cultural tools like arts, films, literature? Do you see a change in that to enable this kind of community building, allies building, making meaning, living a life with the meaning, with this disability? I mean, not in spite of it. So how do you see these arts and culture?
I think art and culture, literature is responding. Has always been there. There have been representations of disability, and let me be very frank. There have been good representations, and there have been bad. So
Film especially.
yeah, the film especially because when there were black and white films, and I offhand I can't remember the name of the film, but there was this film about two friends, one blind and one lame, and they were very good friends. And so there were good films like that where you show a symbiotic relationship and still how people make alike. But then in the 70s, you had that, prototype of the bechara, disabled, specifically woman in a wheelchair, always crying and bemoaning her fate, kind of thing. But having said that, I think arts have responded quite well in terms of persons with disability, whether it is persons with disabilities who are expressing themselves through art, or whether it is art that is representing persons with disabilities. I think for both things, I think the relationship has really improved. We find much improved representation of persons with disabilities. So, like, I mean, people do talk about a Tare Zameen Par, but I would talk more about, say, a Iqbal. Iqbal, if you have seen, that is a more affirmative film about disability rather than Tare Zameen Pe, and I may be short for it.
I mean, I can understand what you're saying. I mean, why you're saying it.
Because that is a more inclusive representation.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. One of the things, and I was thinking whether to ask you this, but I will go ahead. One of the things that often creates this barrier of inclusion, especially with disabled people around, it's an internal attitude of what you said, the assumption of dependence and the capacity. Am I being very too demanding? That constant feeling. In your work, have you ever caught yourself feeling bias or prejudice, or any internal biases or stereotypes you had about the disabled or about anybody else that who's wanting to work with the disabled? Have you ever caught yourself in this situation?
Definitely. Because it's a long 30 years that I have been working. When I came into this work, very frankly, I was not even aware that I could be counted as a person with disability, because dwarfism in that was not in the frame at that time, and I had a pretty quote unquote normal childhood education, etc. So when I came into, I stumbled into disability work. That was my first job. So when you come into disability, you suddenly get a lot of information and you think I am the expert. So the biases come in, and then you say, okay, oh, she can't work, then she can't do this. So this kind of attitudes was there in me also. Over time, I have relearned to examine my biases. And every time I do that, I find myself growing a little bit more, because it's not just confronting your biases, but allowing a person to, participate, and how that helps you. And again, the example that I would like to give you is this art based project that we are doing to stimulate leadership among girls and women with disabilities. So, this is a 3-country project. Okay. One is Vietnam, the other is South Africa, and the other is India. So, all developing countries, colonial hangover, etc. So when the funding university from Canada, they said we'll do it with girls and women with disabilities. So in Vietnam, they are doing it with a blind school, okay, blind and locomotor disability school, and in South Africa, they are doing it with blind girls. I am very experimental, so I said I'm not going to restrict myself. I will do a cross disability pool. So we've got women with locomotor disability, with vision, with hearing impairment, and we got 3 young girls with intellectual disability. Okay. Of course, they are able to participate and everything. But when they came in, I was also, I didn't know how to. I I wanted them there, but I didn't think they would contribute as much they had done. And this is my bias, I would say. I mean, I wanted them in that room because it would be politically correct. It would be nice to have them. But I did not expect so much from them. Really, I'm expressing this. But then when we started doing those activities, you find that yes, they are able to contribute so much more in their own way. But they are enriching this group of girls and women with disabilities by bringing in their perspectives, which was never thought of. Because intellectual disabilities, usually we think that even there's a hierarchy among disabled people. So, other disabled people think, oh, buddhi nahi. They are not intellectually same to us. So they can sit there, but they should be out of the inner circle. But this is where we've brought in them in. And really, I'm telling you, my own understanding about working with the spectrum of disability has changed.
This is, my God, I really like the way you talked about hierarchy even within the disability.
Let us admit it. Let us admit it. Let us not say that discrimination works the same for everybody. It doesn't. It is there for everybody, but it doesn't work the same way.
Dr. Ghosh, before we end, I want you to, I know you said you are not going to sing, but, I ask all my guests that if there is a song or a poem that describes or holds the essence of the work that you do, if you can share that with us, who would like to play that?
I think the song that comes to my mind is a very, very old song, which I think is something that inspires me, and I think it is a very inspiring song. It's this Hindi song, "Itni Shakti Hame Dena Data, Man ka Vishwas Kamzor Hona, Hum Chale Nek Raste Pe Humse Bhool Kar Bhi Kar Oi Bhool Karna." So each word in that song, if you see, it really talks about taking strength from oneself, not from the external God, but from inside. And I think for people with disabilities, I think people who are any person who is discriminated really has to draw on resources from inside to be able to come out and face the world that is there outside, that is discriminatory, that is looking down on them, that is behaving badly with them. So I think that internal resource is very, very required.
So beautifully said. Thank you very much
And
for joining me on Inclusion by Design. It was a pleasure to meet you, and I knew I would be inspired. I knew that I would leave this podcast session with a lot of hope and optimism. But I loved the way you gave examples, and you got so much of yourself into this podcast. I'm very grateful for that.
thank you for having me.
With that, we come to an end of a very warm and beautiful session with Dr. Ghosh. Thank you for tuning in to Inclusion by Design. Please do share your comments, your queries, your suggestions with us. Tell us what resonated with you, what you disagreed with, what you are not very sure of. Engagement with you will bring energy and life into this series. And inclusion by action till the next episode. See you soon.